In this video, we continue our journey in Northwest Illinois along the Chicago Great Western Route from Chicago to Olwine, Iowa, visiting all of the disused stations along the way. This time, we will again focus entirely on the area of the Winston Station and Tunnel, set within the hills of Jo Daviess County. We will explore what remains of this historic monument by car, by foot, and through the air, looking for relics and artifacts that tell the story of this remarkable place.
Aerial photographs from the late 1930s suggest that there were Winston Station railroad structures positioned along the south side of the eastern approach to the Winston Tunnel, approximately 1,400 feet east of the tunnel entrance, just 2 miles from Rowan. A tunnel operator shack was also located on the north side of the tracks, within a few hundred feet of the tunnel entrance. Both the eastern tunnel portal and the station area are today located on private property, and the closest public road from either of them is about a mile distant, making it impossible to see anything from the road.
This Winston Station was originally referred to as tunnel siding for a few years after the tunnel was built. Then it seems to have disappeared for several years, perhaps as there were numerous landslides along the approach, and keeping it open was impractical. Philip Winston, Fendel Winston's elder brother and partner, who also played a major role in the tunnel's construction, passed away suddenly in 1901. The Winston Station then first appears on train schedules around 1903, seemingly coincident with the extensive repairs made to the tunnel and the approaches, though the Winston brothers were not the contractors for this reconstruction.
Although local newspapers referred to the tunnel as the Rice Tunnel or the Rice Township Tunnel, interestingly, it was Minnesota newspapers that first started referring to the structure as the Winston Tunnel, as early as 1901, a name which did not fully take hold locally within Jo Daviess County for a few decades. Perhaps these Minnesota newspapers were friendly to Fendel Gregory Winston's political ambitions and hoped to associate such notable landmarks with Winston's name. Winston ran for Minnesota's lieutenant governorship under the Democratic ticket in 1904, but he failed to win the election.
After building one of the most successful railroad construction companies in the U.S., along with brothers Philip and William, as well as serving on the board of directors for several companies, Fendel Winston passed away a wealthy man in February of 1928, at the age of 78. Interestingly, we have found no mention of the Jo Daviess Tunnel in the list of accomplishments cited by numerous obituaries for either Philip or Fendel Winston. Fendel Winston is buried in Hollywood Cemetery in Richmond, Virginia, the Winston ancestral home.
We'll start today's journey to the Winston Station and Tunnel from Rowan, where we last left off on our tour of the CGW's disused stations. Just a short distance from Rowan, about 800 feet to the west along Irish Hollow Road, we observed a small iron bridge and a railway overpass. Viewer Bob Williams had previously pointed out this structure to us, and it turned out to be a real gem of a find. Girard Hill Road used to run under the CGW trackway, beneath this massive stone overpass. Immediately to the north of the overpass was a small iron bridge over Irish Hollow Creek for foot traffic, automobiles, and wagons. The bridge may predate the railroad, but the massive stone underpass was definitely a construct of the Chicago Great Western. These structures have now been thoroughly abandoned and sit on private property, although you can get a very good look at both just southeast of the intersection of Irish Hollow Road and Girard Hill Road.
Some online photographs indicate that at least a few people have been fortunate enough to visit the eastern portal of the tunnel in the past 2 decades, although the east tunnel entrance has been all but backfilled with earth by the former right-of-way property owners. We knocked on a few doors of prospective landowners along Irish Hollow Road to request permission to explore the tunnel's east approach and portal, but unfortunately no one was at home. Respecting private property, we decided instead to investigate the tunnel's eastern portal from the air via drone.
We felt that the best place to do this was from the top of the hill through which the Winston Tunnel passed, on a road aptly named Rocky Hill Road. To get there from the bridge and underpass location, we headed south-southwest along Girard Hill Road for almost 1.5 miles. Upon reaching Blackjack Road, we turned right, heading due west. We traveled along Blackjack Road for a little over 1.5 miles, until we came to Rocky Hill Road, where we turned right, heading north. About 1 mile along Rocky Hill Road brought us to the top of the ridge.
Atop the tunnel's passage, which ran 200 feet below the ground, we flew our drone towards the east, more than 1,500 feet distant. Being unfamiliar with the terrain regarding trees and wires, we opted to keep to a higher altitude. Besides, we wanted to be able to maintain visual line of sight with the drone and to maintain good radio contact. Since it was early spring, prior to foliage leafing out, we were able to get a very good view of the eastern tunnel approach and the closed-up eastern portal, even at a few hundred feet in altitude.
There are rumors of various clandestine dynamite explosions in the 1970s and 1980s in order to cave in much of the eastern portion of the tunnel, suggesting that property owners sought to keep out interlopers and trespassers. It is certainly possible, but it's also very possible that a tunnel that required such significant restoration and renovation every few decades, due to the unstable rock formations, simply collapsed on its own after decades of neglect. Either way, the eastern segment and portal of the tunnel is all but buried within the hillside.
On the flight back, we also get a view of the eastern ventilation shaft, the square concrete structure to the left of the image. This shaft was about 6 feet in diameter and 60 feet deep, and was likely installed as part of the 1902 reconstruction, as we have found at least one reference to it circa 1910, prior to the 1912 ventilation fan construction. The original mining shaft and ventilation shaft for the tunnel was located near the crest of the hill, near Rocky Hill Road. That we know from multiple contemporary newspaper references.
From the top of this ridge, we'll next head to the western portal of the Winston Tunnel, which is still publicly accessible on Illinois Department of Natural Resources grounds. To get to the preserve entrance, we head back south on Rocky Hill Road for a little more than a mile, turning right and heading northwest on Blackjack Road. We drive along this road for about a mile before making a right-hand turn into the small gravel Winston Tunnel parking area. You need to check when the preserve is open to the public, as at various times it is only open to hunters during deer or turkey hunting seasons. You should also be aware that this is rough terrain. You will be hiking along steep inclines and ridges. And it should also be noted that this is rattlesnake country, and rattlesnakes like to sun themselves on some of the rock outcrops and concrete structures, especially in the warmer months. And if the snakes don't get you, the ticks just might, so be advised.
From the parking area, there are 2 paths that will lead you to the tunnel. We chose the more direct route on the south side of the parking area, which takes you down an incline to a nice walking path. The wider path to the north of the parking area is a bit longer, but has more manageable grades. Once you reach the wider path, from here you'll walk north about 500 feet to a clearing, at the north side of which there is a conveniently placed park bench. And to the north of this bench, stretching across this narrow, steep valley, are dozens of concrete artifacts related to a large trestle bridge that once spanned this gorge.
The Chicago Great Western Trestle, completed in 1887, stood 75 feet above the floor of the valley, stretching 260 feet from abutments to the east and west. Suffice it to say that it was an impressive structure on its own account, a little more than a half-mile west of the Winston Tunnel. This trestle was built at the same time as the Winston Tunnel to carry trains over Rush Creek below. In addition to the concrete piers and footings on the valley floor, with a bit of climbing along the steep grades, you can also still see the concrete abutments on both sides of the ravine.
The original trestle bridge was replaced in November of 1943, within a single day's duration. The concrete piers were poured in advance, and the lower portion of the steel supports were installed on these new piers. On the day of the trestle replacement, the old trestle was pulled down with a huge crane, which then lifted two trestle segments into position over each respective abutment. Then the middle sections were lifted in and dropped into place. Tracks were then quickly laid down on the newly installed steelwork, and trains were running just 9.5 hours after the start of the procedure.
Not surprisingly, this trestle was the location of more than a few accidents. In January of 1898, a westbound train coming through the Winston Tunnel had to come to an abrupt emergency stop when they were alerted that 3 horses and a mule had wandered onto the trestle and gotten trapped between the railroad ties. Section hands approached the unfortunate animals to remove them, but one horse freed itself and bolted over the side of the trestle to its death. The mule fought so hard against attempts to free it that it was ultimately shot and killed. The 2 remaining horses were freed, however. Had the train not been alerted and stopped, there would have almost certainly been a major accident at the trestle. A dozen years later, in September of 1910, a 35-year-old man, Mado Vidovich, a recent immigrant to the U.S., fell to his death from atop the trestle to the valley below. A telegraph lineman found his body the following day.
Just to the northeast of the trestle are the ruins of what was once a large stone farmhouse, which belonged to the Max Petitgout family, a family of French immigrants. In fact, the trestle was locally referred to as the Petitgout Trestle, as the right-of-way and trestle passed through the Petitgout land. One might even be tempted to say that this was the Petitgout Junction.
Petitgout Junction.
We wouldn't say that, of course, but others might be tempted to say such a thing. The Petitgauts lived here for at least a few generations, raising their families, their livestock, and their crops. Now their forgotten home is a crumbling, if not romantic, ruin on Illinois DNR land. After the line from Dubuque to Freeport was abandoned in 1972, the steel trestle which took the Petitgout name and filled their southern skyline was demolished in the later 1970s, with the steelwork being recycled.
Once you found the trestle, which runs east-west, you only need to find the eastern abutments, which mark the former CGW right-of-way, and point directly eastward to the Winston Tunnel. There are likely easier paths, but we opted to climb up the fairly steep northern slope of the Trestle Ridge along a drainage channel, as it seemed to be the most direct route. We came out on the right-of-way about a few hundred feet east of the trestle abutment. Ancient railroad ties were still evident beneath the moss and undergrowth.
From here, it is a direct path eastward, along a generally clear trail, the former CGW right-of-way. You walk along this tree-lined ridge for about a quarter of a mile, where the ridgeway then transforms into a cutting into the hillside. This is where the tunnel approach starts, where the 1887 miners started their work for an open cut for the tunnel approach. Another quarter of a mile brings you to the place where the western portal still quietly abides. Flanked to the south by a 1904 stone retaining wall, and to the north by the 1912 foundations of the powerhouse and fan house.
This is an eerie and lonely place, to be sure. Some have suggested that it's haunted. There would certainly be a host of old ghosts that could inhabit this place. People who died while building the structure, and people that were unfortunate enough to be in the way of a passing train, in the darkness and unsure footing of the tunnel. We, however, witnessed no ghosts on our pilgrimage, no supernatural events, only the slow but sure hand of Mother Nature, natural events reshaping the hillside to its former self.
On our visit, the tunnel floor and entrance were covered by a stream several inches deep, carrying away meltwater from the interior of the tunnel and from the hillside. Recall that the tunnel tips east to west with a 1% grade, and so it will likely always drain towards the western portal. In fact, the entrance area for a few hundred feet to the west was covered with drainage water and mud, and we could only get close to the gate by climbing down along the south retaining wall onto a very narrow patch of earth.
Unfortunately, this meant that we would not be able to get close up to the tunnel gate, as we did not bring along waders. As the tunnel floor was now a stream bed, and since the top of the gate was also effectively closed off, this meant that we would not be able to use the drone to explore the tunnel. We had hopes of placing the drone on dry ground between the tunnel bars to take off and land within the tunnel. But the tunnel floor was underwater from wall to wall, and the small opening at the top of the arch was too narrow for the drone to navigate through.
Previous tunnel explorers, prior to the early 2000s, were able to walk into the tunnel for some distance before their path was blocked by a major tunnel collapse a few hundred feet in. They could also scramble over the ruins of the substantial brick powerhouse, the fan house, and the other concrete sheds built to the west of the powerhouse. Those ruined structures were all taken down more than 15 years ago by the Illinois DNR due to safety and liability concerns.
Above the tunnel portal, you can still see several telegraph poles leaning haphazardly up the hillside to the east, signaling the location of the tunnel beneath. As in other places on the railway, the utility poles mark the path of the former railroad, descending down from the top of the hill to the western approach and portal.
Today, serious cracks in the brickwork and the concrete arches above the western portal suggest that the portal is living on borrowed time. Without any significant maintenance or repair, this tunnel monument may be a memory within a few decades' time. In fact, when we explored the area on top of the tunnel near Rocky Hill Road, we could not help but notice that there is a significant linear depression running both east and west along the tunnel's path, suggesting that the amount of actual collapse within the tunnel on both sides of the road may be extensive. This ancient natural ridge has long fought to take back its slopes from the railroad that tore a hole through its side more than 130 years ago. And at this time, it appears to be winning.
We'll close out this chapter of our Chicago Great Western series here in the shadows of the infamous Winston Tunnel. Although it's troubling to see this monumental engineering achievement, with all of its human toil and sacrifice, now crumbling into the hillside, one also gets the sense that perhaps this tunnel should never have been built. And that even Stickney, with all of his energy and ambitions, was ultimately no match for Mother Nature in all of her powers, especially an everlasting abundance of patience.
If you are enjoying these videos, please remember to like, subscribe, share, and comment. It helps our channel to grow and enables us to make more videos just like this. In the next episode of this Chicago Great Western journey, we'll head northwest to Rice and then along the bluffs and banks of the mighty Mississippi River. We will see you, in a manner of speaking, in our next video adventure.